In 2013, I had a conscious, that means wide awake, experience of being removed out of my home in Union City, California, and taken on board craft by six tall grays. And the experience was just completely, paradigm shattering in that at that point in my evolution, both spiritually and just my perception of reality, I was not prepared at all to see or experience something like this. And when I saw these beings for the first time, as I'm paralyzed and being taken out of my window through the wall, and the gray that comes and approaches me lifts his hand, and all the fear leaves from my body. So he had complete control over my emotional state. And I'm being brought into a craft, and the others go back into the light. And it is a gigantic, not traditional lenticular, but it is this massive ball of light that has kind of like a metallic sheen to it. And as I'm being brought into it, I can clearly see in detail like how the craft looks from the inside. I can see how it bends and curves around. It's very much like a donut-shaped structure that kind of curves into these hallways. And they used a lot of holographic technology within that to show me different kinds of surroundings. They would change my surroundings. But the most impressive thing is that upon entering, they showed me holographically changing my environment, these three beings that walked in front of me. And when I looked closer, the center one was my aunt. And now this is very important because you got to understand at that time, the topic of aliens was not something being discussed by myself or anyone in my family.
Mm.
And it wasn't until 2017 that we started talking about it. But my aunt remembers being taken the exact same night and ending up at the hospital as a result of that experience, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And she's walking in front of me completely disconnected in her pajamas, and they remove this away from me. She leaves into another room, and this holographic prism appears in front of me, and levels of information begin to be being shown to me. And the first level is this alien language that begins to kind of appear in front of me. And the next level is the Pleiades. They take me to the planet Maya, and they show me that I had been incarnate, or a fragment had been incarnated in that time. And they show me, most importantly, these 8 lights that are my children. And from those 8 lights, 4 of them manifested before me. And the children come close to me, and I can see them in the flesh. They have these very thin gray skins, very light, almost glass noodle type hair. It's thicker than our hair, translucent. And their eyes, the pupils, are just magnificent colors and shades and just really deep complexity. And it was incredible because I don't have children, but for the first time in my life, when I saw them, this maternal feeling just took over, and this confusion and these memories that I had been with them, seen them, held them at prior times. And I kept trying to link my current day, everyday reality to these memories. And I was having such a difficult time placing them, trying to think, how did I not remember that? I mean, there were even feelings of guilt and shame because I
Hmm.
was like, I can't remember when this happened. And the feeling of, complete helplessness. Who do I connect with? Who do I call when I get back to Earth? Am I supposed to be responsible for these children? So, the human mind just tries to wrap its head around what's occurring here, and it's just impossible. But
Yeah.
as a result of that experience, they took me into a nebula, a holographic nebula, in which they made me feel for the first time this connection to absolutely everything, and at the same time kind of like disconnect from everything. And it was like we're one with everything, and there's no need to define anything. And that actually was one of the most impactful things, because as a meditation instructor for 12 years, you know I've never reached that level of neutrality that I was introduced to at that time. And I think that kind of created a foundation for integration of that experience there within that moment. When I was taken back to my room, it was like 6 in the morning. So they took me exactly at 3:33, and I was brought back at 6 in the morning. And I was upside down on the side of my bed, and I felt like I got hit by a truck. My entire skin was burning because the light was so bright. My eyes were still watery. The bottom of my pajamas were gray and dark and dirty. And I was barefoot, and I had marks on my hands. I had 3 dots, which I still have them, that just appeared. And I, most importantly, when I went back to work on Monday, I had the ability to see the multidimensional body. And that's when, for me, that was my confirmation. Because even still at that moment, at 6 in the morning, I wanted to call the cops. I wanted to call the hospital. I wanted to call someone to let them know what had happened to me. And I knew that it would sound insane. But when I started to have these abilities, I couldn't leave my house for 3 months after that. So that
Wow.
was kind of the beginning of a major life change.
What you just told us, was that all stuff that you remembered from that experience, or was some of that from the regression?
All of that is completely wide awake conscious experience.
Okay.
Remember, to this day, realer than real life. And so the why I hadn't spoken about it is because at that time I just met my partner at that time, and I was going into a relationship, and I had my company. I had an event planning company, very high end, for many years that I had been working. That was my baby, and I was already feeling that I wanted to depart from that work, but it took me those next few years to be able to really decide that I was ready to do that, because what I was living was a double life. I mean, I knew that this had happened to me. I had these abilities. I couldn't talk to them about to anyone about them. And when I wanted to talk about it, I only told 3 people, my parents and my partner at the time. My family didn't know. No one else knew. No friends of any kind. No one. Because
Mhm.
I was so afraid that people would think I was insane. Right.
Sure.
And so it came to a point in 2016 where I decided I really couldn't do this event planning anymore. It just wasn't making sense. It felt empty and no meaning of any kind, and sometimes obscene because the amounts of money that people would spend, and just it just wouldn't feel right. And I wanted to do meditation more, and I was teaching corporate meditation alongside. That's another business that I have. um, but what happened is that I realized that this was important, and I, even though I would research a little bit, I didn't know the verbiage to use. I didn't know what to use, so I would never find the information I needed. I couldn't find the people to connect. I couldn't find others. I couldn't find support groups. So it wasn't until that time. And the only way I was able to find support was through MoveOn here in Sonoma,
Hmm.
where I met this lady that actually heard my story. She was the first person outside of my circle to hear it. And she's the one that helped me and kind of brought me into that support group. And that's when things started to change. And I heard about hypnotherapy for the first time.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
so I didn't know that that was, something that you could do to help integrate. And she suggested, hypnotherapy to help you understand better what's occurring. So I got the hypnotherapy session, and that's when things started to really, really come out. And my life started to make sense, basically. So the hybridization program is, there's a process, and it begins at an early age, at the age usually of 5 years old or around early years, where implantation begins of usually artificial intelligence that will begin, and also extraction of genetic material. And with that genetic material, artificial intelligence is created in order for it to merge into the body. And this technology begins to track what's happening to the system throughout the progression of the lifespan of the subject. Um, then later on, we'll begin the insemination whenever the subject is ready for that, usually when it's reached maturity, right? So, man or woman would experience that. And after an insemination, there will be a gestation process. Then there is an extraction of the fetus. Now, there's different kinds of hybridization programs depending on who's running the program and what their agenda is. They will either take genetic material and create something that is, in vitro, or literally on a petri dish. It will be completely created and then inseminated into the body. or it'll be something that is put in through other technology into the physical body and gestated for an amount of time. Now, the gestation process is sped up, so it's not the same as humans. And so the end product of whatever is being extracted will be either removed oftentimes through the belly button or, through the natural organs of the human body.
Well,
And
don't
so, mhm.
I was gonna say, don't they perform some type of like C-section, but they don't leave a scar?
Yes, and oftentimes that C-section of a sort is done through the umbilical cord, where an arm, and their technology is incredibly advanced, and in which it's more like artificial intelligence, like organic artificial intelligence, as opposed to just instruments or mechanical objects. So, for example, they would inject something into the belly button, and it would go in and remove the fetus. And other times they would go in through the vagina and pull out as well from the uterus.
Wow.
So this also happens to men, of course. It's not just women that experience this, where genetic material is taken out.
Mm-hmm.
And the important thing about the hybridization program is that the way that the insemination is created or the union is created plays an important role in the organism that's being created, because everything is energy, everything is information. So when two organisms unite, there is a signature, a vibrational signature that's being created by that. So some darker agendas can sometimes create them through very violent and very low kinds of interactions. Okay, and that's for the purpose of that. Others are very high vibration. Sometimes they're incredible ecstatic
Yeah.
experiences, right? There are many different hybridization programs. Aside from the ET spectrum of ET programs, there are terrestrial programs which are involving the government. So a lot of those governmental programs are utilizing a lot of darker techniques in order to create. So, people will go into these military abductions and the scenario is more clinical. It looks like an underground base. It smells like that. You're going to get puncture marks or injection marks in the nape of your neck or in your arms. It's more physical. There's more scars. It's more sloppy. In other words, like the work that's being done is sloppier. When it comes to these extraterrestrials, it's a little bit different. These interdimensional beings, the way that they operate, even if it's the darker, they will use their technology, which involves mind control and, of course, shifting holographically. Sometimes they will screen themselves to appear like humans and create these interactions that seem romantic or whatever, and then the exchange happens, and oftentimes the screen will be removed from people that are more conscious, more awake, will usually become aware of the experience in the middle of the experience as it's happening, because there's trauma that's being occurred there, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And so that will wake them up to really processing what's occurring. So this is what happens, and so it just depends on what kind of program it is. Now let's
Gotcha.
go back to the different steps for the extraction. The extraction will depend on what the agenda is doing. A lot of times, the military programs take the genetic material and they have their own more cloning-like programs. They do have hybridization programs too, which we know as some kind of Earth-grown MK Ultra type programs that are used for the military. They're groomed and they're genetically modified in order to create these weaponized humans. That is more likely a terrestrial program. In these higher programs, these interdimensional beings, oftentimes when they do the extraction, it's going to be very small, where it's just a zygote sometimes, or sometimes they will speed up the gestation process where it looks like maybe a 4 or 5 months term developed fetus and remove that. And this has happened with another member actually of the film, Extraordinary the Seeding, a woman that was she hadn't had intercourse with men ever in her life, and yet she became pregnant and
Mhm.
was pregnant up until 3 months,
Yeah.
four
Wow.
months, And a similar experience happened to me when I was not partnered, becoming pregnant 3 times in my life. And so this is where, when I say my life began to make sense, it's not just, random events. These are really serious things that happen medically, whether it's the development of scarring tissue inside the uterus and, cysts and things that would probably develop from a 35, 40-year-old woman at the age of 16, to these anomalous illnesses that occurred from one day to the next, having experienced insemination. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is where we start to see where this fictional or, non-physical experiences really begin to meet the physical, and where we see that people are having, more traumatic
Yeah.
events.
Well, you have, I mean, if you're experiencing all the symptoms of a pregnancy, and then in some cases, I know like these girls are like planning to have the baby, and then all of a
Yes.
sudden it's just not there
It's
one day.
gone. Yeah.
And then I guess the excuse they use is it was absorbed by your body or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, it's I've actually experienced this myself with a girl I dated in the past, who we always refer to as a hybrid jokingly, because I know she's more ET than anything. Would this happen with her as well?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
one day there was no baby, and she was telling me about being on a craft and raising this
Mm.
child, and she knew everybody's name, and I was up there. It's pretty interesting stuff.
It is. It is. And I think what makes these experiences so unique is that the woman is like physically experiencing this. I mean, going through pregnancy is kind of a big deal. I mean, your hormones are clearly shifting. Your cycles are changing. A lot of body aspects of your physical cycles are becoming adjusting and changing. So it really affects all areas of your life. And more so, what happens when a woman loses the child is another big hormonal shift for her, and it can be
Mhm.
very emotional, very traumatizing, and oftentimes very long lasting trauma can occur from that, where women become fearful then of conceiving or having children. And the doctors, of course, the medical uh, doctors would usually talk about it as a blighted ovum or something that was created through stress. So all kinds of things, so for me, one of the important things that I'm working on right now is trying to create support in the medical field for this, because whether it's a psychosis or a global psychosis that we're going through, or whether we're actually dealing with ETs, which I think it's the later, we need to talk about this, and we need to provide the support for both women and men in order to help understand what is happening, and hopefully in a way that's educated, not coming from a place of fear or doing anything, because we're dealing with technology that far transcends our understanding of everything: biology, science, physics, everything. And so we're infants in beginning to really understand what we're dealing with here.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, um, just to finish, what usually happens after the extraction is that the children will be presented at a later time. And there's an important purpose for that. It's scientifically known that when any animal, any creature, any living being is born, it requires the affection and the connection with the mother, with the host that gave birth to it, in order to help normalize and sustain neurological activity in the brain, and also how it develops and how it sees itself developing as an organism. So this is the same for these hybrids. There is a connection and a union that is occurring with the mothers and the children that are being born. So the presentation is a very important part of it. And I think the more that people begin to remember these experiences, there's women that have been having dreams about seeing babies and children all their life. And it's not that they wish they had children, but it's the specific child that is introduced to them. And it's something similar happened to me as well. I had a reoccurring dream at the age of 5 that my mother would be bringing this little blonde child to me. And I thought it was going to be my future sister, or maybe even my own child at some point. But I never had dreams or illusions of having children. I was never one of those women that would dream about that. So it was just interesting that later on I had forgotten about that reoccurring dream. Now, having met this exact child on the craft, It just really made me look at all these experiences, lights that I had seen, missing time that I had had as a child and throughout my life. Times when I became ill after these weird dreams of being injected or being in these rooms on top of cold slabs of metal and, being operated on or having procedures done. That's where these things start to meet one another.
Hmm. Yeah. I, a woman I know who claims that this happened to her as well. She's a remote viewer, and but her gift is a little more. It's not technically remote viewing, but she can see. She just has a gift, right? So she looked in on this situation. She wanted to know what happened, and what she saw was when they were extracting the fetus. She said they used like this little tool that was like a blue laser, and it was just like this fine little line, and they went in and then pulled it out, and then they used the laser again to seal her back up and left
Yeah.
no scar at all. And then I guess they take the fetus and then they grow it in an incubator on a craft until whenever.
Correct. Correct. As a matter of fact, there are what they call their motherships, are incubation ships that basically there are walls and walls of these incubation tanks. And I just remember one time when I had one extracted, the incubation tank is like this spherical tank with liquid, and it has artificial umbilical cord that once it's removed from my body, it's immediately attached to the artificial and then put back into the liquid for it to incubate. And the walls are just never ending. I mean, I paint this in some of my artwork because it was so impressive. It means that how many of us, men or women, have maybe hundreds, of hybrid children? And for how long has this program been going? And it really makes you think. I mean, the children are a combination of genetic material, but so are we.
Hmm.
Where did we come from? We look at historically our origin back to the very beginning of time, and we can refer texts like the Book of Enoch. We can refer texts like the Emerald Tablets. We begin to look at how ancient lore in all different cultures around the world, from South America to the American Indians to even Northern Europeans down to Indians. I mean, every single continent on the planet has this history of the story of the star beings coming down, creating life with humanoids, right?
Hmm.
So when you begin to look at that and you begin to look at our DNA and how we're noticing how there's such a gap between the apes, the evolutionary cycle of the apes and the human, you begin to understand that we are much more. There's more technology that was utilized for the genetic mutation of the human as opposed to just natural evolution. There's no way. And we are still processing through that evolutionary move right now.
Yeah.
And we are seeing hybrids put into the reincarnation cycle now. We have children that are being born that are remembering not just their past lives, but they're tapping into their star ancestrals. They have information about other planets. They have information about things that they're seeing. I have children that are having contact as children now. And you have to remember that this is generational. This runs in families, runs in bloodlines. It's my belief that it runs in all bloodlines, but some bloodlines remember and have this awareness at surface level where they
Mhm.
begin to remember and recall their contact. And so it goes down the maternal lineage. In my family, every single woman had been abducted, had had contact. And it wasn't until I came public that these conversations started to come forward. And I hear this from my clients all the time.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's why talking about this stuff and coming public is important. I mean, I've been made aware via channeling one time that I have 7 hybrid children at least. And
Wow.
and I don't know. And I asked, how do I connect? And they just said, meditate, meditate, and you'll see us. And I've had children pop up in my meditation, but it's just glimpses, sometimes a little voice, but that's it. So have you had any experience like that as far as communicating with them? Because
At this point, to say that it's one way or another would be like, it'd be so silly to think that. Because we're talking about very complex issues of our interdimensionality. We need to understand that we are interdimensional, and basically everything begins and ends with us. So when we give life to this other organism, it is a part of us that is living and continuing this lineage. What makes these important is our DNA. And our DNA is a complex recording system of the history of the entire universe, the history, of everything, that not just this timeline that we know, but multiple timelines of reality. So when we begin to connect with them, we're connecting with an aspect of ourselves that's living out these alternate timelines on these other dimensional planes. And our information is living through, extending through those beings. So to me, the way that we are um, very enmeshed in this reality, or maybe this holographic reality that we live in, which you can call it a matrix if you want, but everything that we do, everything that we feel, everything that we connect with, we are bringing into the present moment. So when you connect with your hybrids, you're tapping into lineages of information that transcend the physical plane. So it's really important that we begin to train doing that, whether we have hybrid children or not.
Yeah.
However, the way that I look at these agendas, it really just depends. And where my research has taken me is the question of, are they separate? Is there a difference between these very incredibly high vibrational beings? Is there a difference between the military? Because the interest is the same. It's our genetic information. And more than the genetic information, which is just a record keeper, is the infinite life source that sustains this organism running, which is the soul. So the actual thing that is important is not just the DNA, it's the soul that feeds into that information. That is what continues this human race, all races. So when we connect with them, we are accessing one of our many, many cocktail of DNA that we have within us. Dark DNA, what we know as junk DNA, is where we would find the information for all of these holographic fragments of ourselves, which our science has not really understood how to read yet. And hopefully, as they learn, we'll be able to access some of that multidimensional aspect of ourselves.
I wonder how many, well, I mean, I'm sure there's scientists out there I mean, the ones that are doing this stuff understand all of what you just referred to. Obviously, the mainstream scientists don't know, but I know the one question that has come up a few times when we have brought this subject up is free will. This is an infringement on free will, or did we all sign up for this and don't remember? Because it's some people are very this isn't easy to accept for some people. It's very intrusive.
Absolutely. And that's a really important thing to talk about. And it's a perfect segue for this last conversation we just had about, who's doing what and what's their purpose. I mean, ultimately, in the way, when we look at the laws of the universe and of creation, we are organic beings. And so we need to understand that we abide by laws that transcend our ideas of what physics and the laws of this current earth are, right? Because right now we're operating by the laws that we see here of nature, but we don't understand that yet. We're still in infancy of understanding that. I mean, even our technology is so far behind. So if we begin to go inside, this is why meditation is important. We begin to access this universal collection of information that transcends what's being put out here. And what that allows us to do is to tap into the higher laws of creation of the universe. And in those laws is an understanding of how we are one. First of all, we are source, and each one of us, as a fragment of that source, embodies within that the information of the all. So if you look at it that way, where does your free will play in? Are you the creator, or are you being created by something outside of you? The human
Interesting.
the human has the ability to experience all potential expressions of that infinite. And so, and this is something that when you look at ancient texts, they understood that as well. So this is none of this is really new. This is what we can discover through our understanding of ourselves. but we make contractual agreements and we are united and experiencing on this earth plane, this current experience, because we're in resonance with one another. Even if it seems millions and billions of people, there is a collective experience being had here. And the hybrid and the access to these other dimensional planes is just one of many. We are entangled more and more in this matrix through the hybrids. They continue to sustain us attached to this physical dimensional plane. Our free will begins to play a role when we become aware that we have free will, when we realize that all our um, emotions and all of our experiences make us a match to what we're going to experience. So even the darkest experiences that we have, we somehow agree to have those. And we may have made those agreements at times of lower consciousness, whether in this lifetime or another lifetime. So it's really important to understand that, because what that's saying is that we basically created these experiences ourselves, but in states in which we're not conscious. So what that also means is that that means that something that is more conscious at that time, or perhaps playing out that same unconsciousness, takes advantage of our unconsciousness. And I call that parasitic consciousness. A lot of these beings are playing out these parasitic dynamics in which they receive and survive off the life force that's being created by sustaining life within this multidimensional matrix. So the exchange is even in that we're in an expression of duality. But when you reach the higher levels, source or the beings that descend from those higher dimensional planes, in my opinion, would never interact in those parasitic exchanges. So I think it's a part of natural evolution, but I think that the more we wake up and the more we become aware of the sovereignty that we have to govern not just this physical body, but our multidimensional aspects, we will be able to experience other possibilities and move away from the idea of separation or fear or these things that are happening in these lower programs.
That was probably the best possible answer to that question.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, you really you really put some thought into this, and you brought up a lot of interesting concepts that I don't think many of us think about. You know, we just like, oh, this is me, this is a violation, but we don't think about the higher aspects of it because we don't understand it. It's obviously we're programmed not to understand it. They want us, down here just on autopilot.
Right. And that's the difference between artificial intelligence and consciousness. We become artificial intelligence when we're constantly mechanical in hypnosis, by the television, by radio, by all these things, by distractions that pull us away from what's really happening, which is the things that are happening in dream time, things that are occurring in the astral plane, like these abductions, like these all of these programs. They're operating on levels that we are not even aware of, and the government knows that. There are experiments that have been happening on our consciousness since the 50s, since the 40s. Mind control, MK Ultra,
Montauk.
Montauk. I mean,
that was
one of many.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They know us better than we know ourselves. That
Exactly.
is for sure. That is for sure. And they purposely suppress any information that's going to help us get to know ourselves better.
Exactly.
As soon as you know your potential, their game's over.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to talk about these topics, because it's not so much about pushing the agenda of fear or the feeling of being helpless, because we are so not helpless. The more we understand that we are literally the creators of what we're experiencing, the 99%, because remember that our reality is fabricated, created, designed by a small 1%, which are all bloodline related. And this goes into DNA, because I researched the DNA as well. Holographically, we are all related, right? 2,000 years, you and I, both of us, we've had relatives in common. 2,000 years. So we come from an origin lineage, and these families that are in power are bloodlines that have been heavily preserved through royal families and families that are in control, that are managing the financial systems of the world, Every single umbrella system that governs our reality is managed by them. So when we really, really let that sink in, we begin to realize, okay, who are we serving with our dollars? Who are we serving with our time, with our energy, with our emotions? Are we just puppets of a system that is constantly parasiting off our actions? And so that's where things kind of really begin to take a turn, where we're coming to a place in time where we need to realize that we have more power than we believe.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so glad you're touching on all that, and especially the bloodline stuff, because if you really break it down, wasn't it like a 12-year-old girl discovered that like all of our presidents that were belonged
Well,
to
exactly.
one bloodline, to
Yeah.
some ancient bloodline? What does that tell you? It tells you not only one, that they try and preserve the bloodline, but two, it's very important to keep someone from within that bloodline in a position of power for whatever reason. And it tells you a lot about the elites and some of the royal families and stuff, because it just doesn't make sense. It seems like such an old-fashioned way of life that it's no longer relevant.
Yeah.
Keeping that hierarchy class system going is not gonna we're not gonna progress that way, right?
Exactly. And in 2017, when I had my hypnotherapy, one of the things that I tapped into, I've been heavily deprogramming myself for several years, meditating up to 8 hours a day until I came to a neutral point. And that's when I had the hypnotherapy.
I don't know
I
how
began,
people do that 8 hours a day. Sorry.
yeah, it
Kudos
was
to you.
amazing. Well, I wanted to become a nun at one point, but there's no nunnery that does what I want to do, right? On this level of understanding, unfortunately. And the idea was because you reach a level where you have infinite access to information. And so I began to notice that three main bloodlines are the ones that seeded life on this planet. It was a red bloodline, a blue, and a green, a reptilian, a Pleiadian, and an inner earth bloodline that are the creators and designers of our matrix. And from these bloodlines descended all of the main races and all of the races in power, what we know as the blue blood, in the royal families. All of those are descendants that went trickled down into the presidency. And these are the families which we already know already by now, the ones that are managing these religious movements as well, political movements, everything from the food that you're eating to the pharmaceutical companies are all, and technology as well, are all infiltrated by these families. They manage it. So you said it earlier. We are a product of an environment where the more we are sleeping, the more we're not aware of what's happening, the easier it is to manipulate and to become a puppet to the system. And where things start to get serious is when we don't understand what our DNA is. We look at epigenetics and the fact that everything in our environment writes our genetic code. It influences what we're going to be feeding in our bodies in the next 10, 15 years. This happens holographically on higher levels in other dimensional planes as well. When we are sleeping, we enter dream time. We go into the astral plane. We're interacting with entities that are above the physical that are also influencing what we're experiencing. So the more and more we become awake in waking time, the more we can become awake in those levels. And I think that this is something that is ancient knowledge as well. If we look at the ancient Egyptians, Mayans, in South America, the Incas, all revered the afterlife, all revered the practice of going into these altered states of consciousness in order to access pure form information.
Mhm.
So the hybridization program is incredibly important in that cloning programs that are being created by the government are meant to create other life forms that are sustaining worlds in the same way that we're sustaining this world. They are sustaining other worlds. And this is done on many levels. There's many planets that are holding on to races like this. So it's another expression of the experience of becoming conscious, becoming aware, applying that free will. And we have the ability when we change our frequency to no longer be a match to these hybridization programs. I work with my clients a lot, experiencers that have very traumatic experiences, and their children are having experiences. And of course, they can't control that because it's happening on another plane. So how do we need to learn how to navigate that plane now more than ever. And I believe that this is the technology of the future. As things become more virtual, artificial intelligence, that is the level that we're going to have to start operating at in order to move away from becoming artificial intelligence and moving towards the organic. One of the ways to control our awareness of what's happening and to desensitize ourselves from reality is by the Hollywood, by the entertainment industry. Pretty much all disclosure of all things that have happened historically are coming out in films. And they do it in such a way. I mean, this is something that was also created by the government in the 50s to make aliens look like something out of this world, like it's not even a part of your reality. What better way to completely make you, cut that possible reality out of your scope? Because the thing is that they do that in such a powerful way because we are consciousness. Okay. And so the deeper you go down the spiritual aspect, you will be met with the topic of consciousness. The deeper you go down the scientific realm, you're going to be met with the topic of consciousness. So eventually the human will wake up to the awareness of consciousness. And that's where these interdimensional planes come into play. I think it's only a matter of time collectively that you can suppress something. And we're at the time where finally all that's coming out. The cloning thing is a very serious thing. I was taken out of an Airbnb when I was speaking at a conference and taken into an underground base. And when I was taken with two other speakers that were with me at that time, they did something that was like a spinal tap, removing genetic information from the spinal cord. And just with that, they're able to create clones. Entire full body clones. And again, it's not about the external aspect of the body, it's the genetic information that we hold within us. And a lot of experiencers have that happen to them. They become aware of their ET contact, and then they begin to have military contact. And so that's something that we need to learn how to navigate. Because
was this a physical abduction?
Yes,
you guys were
absolutely.
taken underground physically?
Yes.
That's very intriguing.
It was one of the most traumatizing things that happened in my life, actually, because I wasn't prepared for that, because I didn't realize. I heard about it. I mean, you hear about these things, but I didn't realize that it would happen to me, or it could happen. But I was in a moment where I was already talking a lot about these things, and I was getting into a lot of information about a lot of darker things. And when you start talking about those things like draconians, reptilians, in the government, I think yes, it really does. And it comes etherically and it comes physically. So that was the first of other my lab experiences that happened, but the most traumatic. And I was taken out of the Airbnb, and this was in Colorado, in the middle of nowhere, and taken into an underground base, 54 floors underneath, in the middle of a field, and taken into these rooms that they look like a medical hospital type rooms, like from the 50s. They're very old looking, and they smell old. And they undressed me, they washed me, and they put me inside of these little kind of seats that look like a medical chair, but super minimalist, just enough for me to sit on and be connected to a back rest of some sort. And I was injected with this giant yellow liquid into my right arm. And I had the puncture mark the next day. And I had the bruise and the pain in the spine for like 2 months. I couldn't do yoga or any exercise of any kind after that. And my colleague that was with me was next to me, and I could see her undressed as well, just as myself. And when they were done doing what they were doing, and here's the thing that I want to mention about that the way I realized this was happening is that I woke up at 4 a.m. screaming, "I'm not the only one." I was screaming, "I'm not the only one." And we were sharing a room with two other ladies. The one underneath me was the one that was taken with me, along with a lady in another room. And she heard me, and everyone was quiet. My sweater was soaking wet. The whole front of my sweater was wet, not sweat. It was just wet in a circle here in the front. And it's because of they had washed me earlier. And 3 days later, after that happened, I began to tell my colleague about the dream that I had. My dream was that a gray was approaching me and injecting me. Okay. So this is screen technology as well,
Screen memory.
because when we started to discuss it, she had the exact same dream, same place. She started to describe the same room I was in, the same people were dressed, the same location of the walls, of the windows, of everything. It was pretty terrifying, right? And later, when we connected with the other lady, she had the same experience that night. She says, I remember a white van. That's all I remember. And that's when you get chills down your spine, because you never talked to this lady. And she's talking about a white van that appeared in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. Okay. And so, the interesting thing about that is we were regressed after that experience. And you begin to notice all the things that come up. And who is at the very end of this? It's the Biological Warfare Department, Nuclear Biological Warfare Department of the United States. And governing above that is the darker, real, true government, who is the draconian that is managing those programs. So to me, the way I look at it, there is no separation in the interest of mankind between these interdimensionals and Earth. So it's very difficult when you get to the highest levels of understanding to differentiate them. This is why I looked at the question about free will. This is why I began to question that. Anyway.
That's an incredible story. I'm sorry you had to go through that. So what do you think they were doing, trying to clone you guys? Or you
Cloning.
Yeah.
Cloning. Yes. And the interesting thing about that is that, they probably do this to hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And people end up with probably illnesses, problems in their body as a result of these things. A lot of people that live near military bases report missing time, report these kinds of dreams, these communications. And as you can see, there's technology being utilized to make it look like it's ETs, so that it's something fabulous and difficult to understand, right?
Yeah.
Something that would look fake and unreal. And also they manipulate a lot of things. And anyway, I had many experiences after that were similar to that. I even took a drug test after an experience that happened to me, found chemicals in the body, like actual drugs. So, this is not just fabrication or imagination or dreams. These are actual things that are happening.
Oh, sure.
In the physical.
Yeah. Going back to the clone thing, just while it's on my head, something that I that caught my attention from that movie is they were talking about how they can basically put design flaws in. They can give a person a disease or a time or a expiration date of 5 years, or they want this person to have cystic fibrosis or whatever. They can do whatever they want. And they do it for liability purposes. If the clone dies in 5 years and then they just immediately replace it with another clone, it's for whatever they're trying to get away with, the corruption. There's less liability for whatever reason. I don't know. They explained it in the movie, but it's just like, I can totally see this happening among the political arena with these politicians. They always look different all the time. Some, like, how many Bidens and Hillarys and all these people have we seen? Like, is this happening like right in front of our faces? I'm pretty sure it is.
I definitely think it is, in ways that we probably couldn't even comprehend, even with people that we are with. And I think that it doesn't only happen physical clones, but also etherically, by humans that are not conscious of themselves become hosts to parasitic consciousness that is directed through mind control. People that, we look at the MK Ultra program, and also, how fragmentation is occurred of personalities in order to create disassociation, in which they can program one person to carry something out, and that same person will never remember that they did that. So these kinds of things are also happening. And, it's being diagnosed as schizophrenia and other kinds of mental diseases and disorders. But I believe that some of these disorders are created through mind control and hijacking of the subconscious mind of a human. And it can be done in many very subtle ways that one would not even remember. what happened to them. And things are being carried out. We look at terrorist things that have happened historically. These people are mobilized to carry some of these things out. And
Absolutely.
so the question is, again, where does our free will play a role? And if we're going to continue to be hosts for parasitic consciousness, we can be anyone's puppet at any time, any day. So the thing is that what we are going into now and where our awareness needs to be, our focus, now that the ET topic is coming into mainstream, is the idea of universal consciousness, the idea that we are more than just the human race, we're more than just our lives and the stories that we live, the traumas, the things that we are. There is beyond that. And beyond that is more important right now. It's important to integrate and heal that trauma as soon as possible so that we can begin to integrate the higher levels of ourselves. Our intuition has to come online. That's our technology.
Yes.
That's the future of technology. Our ability to communicate telepathically. That's already happening. It's just that we're not aware of our communication, our connection, the way that we interact with each human. All of these aspects of the superhuman, they need to come in now. That's the technology.
Yes.
If we don't go in that direction, we're headed in the direction of artificial intelligence, where we're glued to technology. We're dependent. We're completely codependent of that technology. And that's where the human loses its rights.
Yeah.
Anything, you know.
So I'm so glad you said that about the intuition. I was just saying the other day, right now we're in like information war, spiritual war, tons of disinfo flying around. Nobody knows who to believe or what to believe. And there's people out there who are calling out these people and like telling, whatever, they're calling them out. But instead of calling them out, because you don't necessarily know, it's very confusing. The waters are very muddy. But instead of calling them out, we should be teaching people how to tap into their intuition. If everybody is doing that on their own, you don't have to go out of your way and point fingers and do this and that. You can just know on your own. So put all the energy into trying exposing someone, or we can all just be helping each other elevate and tap into that intuition, and our bullshit meters just automatically come on, and right off the bat if these people are lying or not. And that's how you discern your way through these times, because
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's so important. Thank you, because I believe that one of the greatest takeaways of the past year is precisely that, the exercise of our discernment, right? And what's happening in the world around us. I think the more and more we enter these higher vibration, because the entire planet Earth right now is shifting in vibration, literally. It's going faster, which means that time is also speeding up, which means that the bodies are adjusting, and all lower vibration information is coming to surface. And we see that in the world. We've seen that for years now. All of these hidden truths are starting to come out. Everything from Me Too to Pizzagate, all these things that are coming out in the surface. More is going to come out now of our history. And how do we adjust quickly to that is by staying in a state of neutrality, in which we understand that emotions are simply tools. They're not meant to be embodied. They're not meant to be identified. All the experiences that happen are not meant to. We don't need to make it our own. We need to observe, discern, and then choose wisely as we navigate through all these things. Because as you notice, not just what's happening in the world, but all of these movements are happening, left and right, movements. What for? What are they there for? It's not like those topics are new. We're dealing with those topics for forever, but what's happening is separation. And what's the best way to confuse a human is to put them in compartmentalized thinking and separation so they can't access unity consciousness.
Yes.
So we really have to use this time to connect with the self and create union within the body, feminine, masculine, deal with father issues, mother issues, feminine, masculine aspects of ourselves that are imbalanced in order to understand, feel, experience unity. And then that's translating out to our surroundings, friends, family, our children. And the children are actually so incredibly awake. They know, they have their intuition so aware. They know ahead of time, what's real and what's not. So the more that we can come back into that state of neutrality, that awareness, the easier it'll be for us to discern what's occurring in the next couple of years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
going back to the children, just a question I have about the hybrids. So what happens to all these children up once they're raised? Are they going off in the secret space programs? Are they coming back to Earth? I know you said some are reincarnating. I mean, if as many people as you claim are being
Yeah.
raised,
Fantastic question.
yeah, what's happening to these children?
Yeah, so this took the second part of my research into understanding what are they being created for, right? So there are many different agendas, depending on whatever species or consciousness presents itself as. And we have to remember that we're kind of moving through kinds of archetypes of species. Okay, so in our immediate realm, we understand certain archetypes, the draconians to, I don't know, Arcturians and everything in between there, right? All these ranges of frequencies and manifestations. They all have these programs. Some of these beings that are created for much lower vibrational programs. Some of them are interdimensional, like entities, like parasitic consciousness that are designed to carry out these parasitic uh, agendas, I guess. Some of these other aspects are higher vibration. They are activated DNA. Higher vibration means activated DNA. More strands of their DNA are online, which allows more of their superhuman abilities to become online and awareness of a collective self. So these children are being brought into the reincarnation cycle, some of them. And they are brought into the reincarnation cycle depending on the phase of the vibrational frequency of the planet. As we are evolving, we are all constantly evolving. We're changing frequency. Each frequency dial, let's say, is a wave of information that is a match to some of these children that are being inserted into the timeline. And at the same time, other older models are being exited from the timeline. And so this is the cyclical pattern. This is also occurring on other planets as well. Some of these children are not meant to grow up. They are just children. And there are two reasons for that. One of them is the development and genetic modification of the genetic information that is within them. They are meant to be experimented on. Another one is the destruction of the child. The child has all of its energy centers completely open. And up until the age of 7 is when you can program this organism, not just in that lifetime, multidimensionally, which means that if you fragment and cause trauma on the specimen of a child at this age, it's going to use that information in other lifetimes, in other incarnations. Okay, so in some ways, it's weaponized, these hybrids.
Oh yeah.
Right, in some ways, they are used to prolong the reincarnation cycle on Earth. So it really just depends. And I think that there is a level of collective evolution that is occurring through the souls that wake up and activate their free will. Um, but I also believe that because we are in the three-dimensional plane, we are here to experience duality. So it's not like we're ever going to eliminate the negative aspect. In this dimensional plane, we're here to experience that duality. I think that once you change and you integrate your polarity within you, you can experience other timelines, other universes with other laws of creation. And I think that that's an option that we need to become aware of. A lot of us don't know. These are things that have been written of in ancient texts for centuries. You know, this is ancient wisdom, the alchemy of the human organism,
Mm-hmm.
and of creation. You know,
Well,
so
and
that's my take on it. Yeah.
yeah, and instead of trying to save the world, which at this point, not one single individual can do, you can just work on yourself. And it's so cliche. We say it all the time, but it's true. You create your own timeline.
We create everything we experience, which is the most important key, not just in waking time, but in dream time, in
Yeah.
astral, all the planes. Well, the world is the way that our reality is structured is that we're fractal upon fractal upon fractal upon fractal. So everything is worlds within world within world. What's happening in the world at large outside of us is what's happening in the world inside of us. So the only way to affect the world, if that's your intention, is through the internal work. That is the
Yes.
law of the universe and creation. So it's not really, there's no need to think, that we're being selfish or anything like that. It's just the laws of creation. And we can understand that by understanding that we're creating holographically, we're projecting everything that's in the energy centers of the body contributes to the subconscious belief systems that are being projected into the reality. And they design what you're going to run into right when you leave this room, when you get up, when you go pick up the phone. It designs your every moment. So that's really important. And it also plays a role in the reintegration of your fragments. Okay, so let's talk about the next step. So we have our fragments through trauma throughout our lives and also through these hybrids, right? Because ultimately, those hybrids are a fragment of ourselves. So when we clear up the fragmentation that we've experienced in this lifetime, we begin to access other lifetimes. And as we reintegrate the fragments of those other lifetimes, we're accessing also our hybrid children, our hybrid fragments. So the best way to communicate and heal with hybrid children is by reintegrating the fragments that were created in those experiences of creation, because that experience was made to demonstrate your creative ability. And so the sooner we understand that we can reintegrate that fragment, the sooner we heal not just ourselves, but that soul that was created through you. It affects that entity and it affects all of the DNA lineages that are connected to that hybrid. Because remember, these hybrids are a cocktail of DNA. Human is just one of those hybrids. So it's a mixture of many. So within those many different DNA strands are archetypes of consciousness that we have the ability of clearing up.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the healing. Yeah.
I mean, I think we're all a cocktail of DNA,
Exactly.
right? And
Exactly.
I think that's why we're so sought after by certain races, is because we're actually very unique in a way, in the sense that we are living in a poison environment, the food, the air, the water, everything, and we still have the ability to adapt and thrive, as where other species don't necessarily have that luxury. So we're very interesting to certain groups.
It's a controlled environment, yeah, for
Yeah.
a purpose. And it's because
Yeah.
of the soul, because we have the pure soul. It's that life sustaining life force that artificial intelligence rejects to recognize that they have, so they become parasite. So yeah, you're absolutely right about that. We have a very important.
Yeah. We are genetic royalty, guys. Remember that.
Yeah.